Okay, so the next era of United States history has to deal with imperialism and manifest destiny and the settling of the West. Now, the seeds of American imperialism and the United States becoming a world power were planted early on in our history. Now, Thomas Jefferson and the Louisiana Purchase set in motion America's manifest destiny. Now, manifest destiny was the belief in the God-ordained right of Americans to settle and colonize the continental United States, from the Atlantic to the Pacific coast. Now, the guy who coined this phrase was newspaper editor John O'Sullivan in 1845. Now, this was in reference to the annexation of Texas and on the belief that America would lead the world in the transition to democracy. The westward expansion of the United States starts with the French Emperor Napoleon. Yeah, go figure. Now, Napoleon needed money to fight the British in 1803. Now, Napoleon saw a perfect opportunity to unload his territories in North America. Jefferson, being no fool, jumped at the chance to double the size of the United States. Now, the next big land acquisition came about through the Mexican-American War. See, Mexico had allowed American citizens to settle what was known as Mexican Texas. Now, these settlers started to become disenchanted with the Mexican government and began to agitate for independence. Now, in February of 1836, Colonel William Travis and approximately 260 men made a stand at a small little mission called the Alamo. Travis and his men were wiped out, but the Republic of Texas was declared on March 2nd, 1836. Now, when the United States annexed Texas in 1845, the Texicans were happy. The Mexicans weren't as happy. Now, the United States and Mexico fought a war from 1846 till 1848. The end result was the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This was signed February 2nd, 1848. Now, this treaty gave the United States undisputed control of Texas. It established the U.S.-Mexican border along the Rio Grande. It ceded to the United States the present-day states of California, Nevada, Utah, most of New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and parts of Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. Now, just before the Mexican-American War broke out, the United States and Great Britain had settled the boundary question for the Oregon country. Now, this is during the 1848 presidential elections. One of the main issues was the settling of the boundary between the United States and British Canada. The slogan at that time was 54-40 or fight. That was in reference to the longitudinal degree that the U.S. wanted the borderline to be drawn. Now, neither country was really interested in having a war, so the border was adjusted peacefully. Now, with the signing of the Oregon Treaty in 1846 and with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States had fulfilled its manifest destiny, Atlantic to the Pacific coast. Now, with the acquisition of new lands, the government developed a system in 1851 to handle the problem of white settlers encroaching on the Native Americans. Now, the Indian Appropriation Act of 1851 authorized the federal government to set up reservations for the Native Americans. Okay, so the plan was to keep Native Americans on the reservation while white settlers settled on the productive land surrounding those reservations. Now, in return for living on the reservations, the federal government promised to take care of the Native Americans. That didn't go so well, as we're going to see. Now, there were just a couple of minor problems with this system. See, white settlers were encroaching on Native American lands due to gold, and the government just kept breaking their treaties or ignoring what the white settlers were doing with the Native Americans. You know, go figure, the U.S. government not living up to treaty obligations. All right, we now have the discovery of gold in California. This quickly changed the fortunes of many people. However, it also changed the fortunes of the United States of America. The discovery of gold in California quickly changed the fortunes of many people. However, it also changed the fortunes of the United States of America. See, the gold coming out of California quickly infused the American government and the American economy to such an extent that California was quickly admitted to the Union on September 9th, 1850, becoming the 31st state. Now, this was done without even being organized as a territory first. Well, now, why did they do this? Well, if a foreign power would try to take over territory, it could become an international incident. But if a foreign power were to invade a state, that would mean war. Now, by making California a state, the United States was heading off any foreign intrigue and possible wars. Okay, so the United States now has control from the East Coast to the West Coast. The northern and southern borders are set. Our manifest destiny is complete. Everything is great. Well, not really. You see, the country had one major problem that had to be solved, and that was slavery. Now, with all the new territories, the question became one of free or slave. Should territories be free or slave territories? More importantly, when they became a state, should they enter as a free state or slave state? Now, the inevitable happened. America went to war with itself, the Civil War. Now, the reason was over slavery, but it was also over states' rights. Did the federal government have authority to tell the individual states what they can and cannot do? In this case, it was slavery. Hey, we're actually seeing this again down on the border between Texas and the Biden administration about immigration and fences. Okay, from 1861 to 1865, the Civil War slowed down America's settling in the West. This would change after the Civil War. Also, with the construction of the Continental Railroad, would bring hundreds of thousands of settlers out west. This migration would cause conflict with the Native American population. Now, it became known as the Indian Wars in history. Now, the driving force behind the westward migration, at first, it was gold. The gold rush in California in 1848 caused California's population to grow from 92,500 in 1850 to 379,900 in 1860. A 310% increase in just 10 years. Now, the first major clash would come with the 62 discovery of gold in Montana. The Bozeman Trail was an overland route in the western United States connecting the gold rush territories of southern Montana to the Oregon Trail in eastern Wyoming. In 1863, two men, one by the name of John Bozeman and the other John Jacobs, scouted for a direct route from Virginia City, Montana to central Wyoming to connect the Oregon Trail, which was the major passage to the west coast. Now, the overland Bozeman Trail followed many north-south trails. The Native Americans had used these trails since before recorded history to travel. Now, these trails passed directly through territories occupied by the Shoshone, Arapaho, and Lakota nations. Clashes between Native Americans and white settlers were inevitable. Native raids on white settlers increased dramatically from 1864 to 1866. Now, this in turn resulted in the U.S. government ordering the Army to carry out military campaigns against the Native Americans. Now, one of the most infamous Native American massacres took place at Sand Creek. It was November 29, 1864, when about 675-man force of the 3rd Colorado Cavalry under the command of U.S. Volunteer Colonel John Chivington attacked and destroyed a village of Cheyenne and Arapaho people in the southeastern Colorado Territory, killing and mutilating the Native American people. Chivington claimed about 500 to 600 warriors were killed. However, most sources estimated around 150 Native Americans were killed, and about 2/3 of whom were women and children. Now, here's my question. Why did Chivington order the massacre of women and children? Okay, well, it was because he wanted to, and under the color of law and the U.S. Army, he believed he would get away with it. You see, numerous peace treaties had been signed between Native Americans and the U.S. government, which promised to respect the Native American lands. However, if gold or other valuable resources were found, white settlers ignored the treaties and the land rights. The Native Americans would fight back against these settlers, and the Union Army would protect the settlers, of course. So, in the summer of 1864, Colorado Governor John Evans sent a circular to the Plains Indians, inviting those who were friendly to go to a place of safety at Fort Lyons on the eastern plains, where the people would be given provisions and protected by the United States troops. Now, Colonel Chivington told the chief that if they sought peace, they should come to Fort Lyons and be under the protection of Major Wyckoff. 652 Arapaho, led by Chief Little Raven, appeared at Fort Lyon beginning around November 6, 1864, and were under the protection of Major Anthony, who had replaced Wyckoff. However, when 600 Cheyenne, led by Chief Black Kettle, arrived at the fort seeking the same deal, Major Anthony turned them away. The Cheyennes were told to go make camp 40 miles northwest of the fort. They were also advised to fly an American flag over a white flag to signal they were not a threat. Now, at sunrise on November 29, 1864, Colonel Chavington gave the order to attack. Two officers, though, Captain Silas Soule and Lieutenant Joseph Kramer, commanding Company D and Company K respectively of that 1st Colorado Cavalry, refused to obey orders and told their men to hold fire. However, the rest of Chavington's men immediately attacked the village. They ignored the U.S. flag and white flag that was run up shortly after the attack began. They murdered as many of the Indians as they could. The total casualties for the Native Americans were 150 Indians who were killed, and again, about 105 of whom were women and children. Now, there was a congressional investigation which followed this massacre, and they noted among other major issues the following. Quote, "The indiscriminate slaughter of men, women, and children has frequently occurred in the history of the Indian Wars, but the fact which gives such terrible force to the condemnation of the wholesale massacre of Arapahoes and Cheyenne by Colorado troops under Colonel Chavington near Fort Lyon was that those Indians were there encamped under the direction of our own officers and believed themselves to be under the protection of our flag," end quote. See, even though evidence was overwhelmingly against Chavington, he was beyond the reach of Army justice because he had already resigned his commission. The Army could not punish him, but Chavington's political career was effectively over before it even began. Now, up to his death, Chavington maintained that Sand Creek had been a successful operation. The public saw it the other way. Now, he argued that his expedition was a response to Cheyenne and Arapaho raids and torture inflicted on wagon trains and white settlements in Colorado. He even wrote a defense for his actions that day, and it was titled Sand Creek Massacre, John M. Chavington's Defense to the People of Colorado. There's a link in the description below if you're interested in reading it. Now, it's my belief that Chavington just needed an excuse to massacre the Native Americans. His justification of it was in response to Cheyenne and Arapaho raids and tortures inflicted on wagon trains and white settlements in Colorado doesn't hold water. They had an American flag up. They were flying the white flag also. His excuse doesn't make sense. Anyways, by the end of the Civil War, westward migration was increasing. At the height of the westward migration in the 1870s, nearly 400,000 people moved west looking for land and a better life. This also brought the settlers into conflict with the Native Americans. Now, with the increased migration of settlers, the federal government proposed the Fort Laramie Treaty in 1868 to ensure safe passage for the migrants and to end the intertribal warfare. The treaty established the Great Sioux Reservation west of the Missouri River and gave control of the Black Hills to the Native Americans in perpetuity, in an effort to keep white settlers from taking over the sacred center of the world, as the Native Americans believed. There was just one problem, and that was gold. As the Joint Congressional Committee noted in their report on the condition of Indian tribes in 1865, quote, "The committee are of the opinion that in a large majority of cases, Indian wars are to be traced to the aggression of lawless white men, always to be found upon the frontier or boundary line between savage and civilization. Such is the statement of the most experienced officers of the Army, and all of those who have been long conversant with Indian affairs," close quotes. Once gold was discovered in the Black Hills, it was impossible for the American Army to keep out the white prospectors. Now, between 1875 and 1878, thousands of prospectors entered the Black Hills in search of gold. Needless to say, the Sioux and the Cheyenne tribes were not amused that another treaty was broken. Custer was sent out to bring the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors back to the reservation. His plan was to take the women and children and elderly Native Americans who were camped along the Little Bighorn River as hostages. This would force the warriors to surrender and go back to the reservation, peacefully. So he thought. Yeah, there were just two big flaws to Custer's brilliant plan. First, the Native Americans did not follow his plan. Second, he was outnumbered. The Native Americans had approximately 2,000 warriors, while Custer only had 700 troopers. That was a 3-to-1 superiority for the Native Americans. Plus, they had superior weapons at that time also. So Custer split his command, thereby weakening his battle force even more. On June 25th and 26, 1876, Custer led his 264 troopers into a battle, and the rest, as they say, was history. His entire command was wiped out, 268 dead, including Custer, and 55 severely wounded. The only officers who made it out alive with their troops were Captain Benteen and Major Reno. Now, the American public did not hear about the massacre until the first week in July, and the headlines demanded revenge for that massacre. On July 6, 1876, edition of the Helena Weekly stated, "Terrible fight. General Custer and his nephew killed. 7th Cavalry cut to pieces." The July 7th edition of the Chicago Daily Tribune wrote, "Too true. Appalling tale of butchery. Official confirmed. A feeling of most bitter resentment awakened in the country. General demand that the demons be made harmless." Some history of the principal wild beast called Sitting Bull. Now, in just 3 years, in 1879, the United States government opened up the United States Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This was an attempt to assimilate the young Native Americans into the white American culture. The school required the students to speak only English, to practice Christianity, take on a new European name, and wear European American style clothing. The government was in effect trying to assimilate the young Native Americans by wiping out their culture and history through education. The next step in forced assimilation came in 1887 when the Dawes Act was passed in Congress. This act petitioned the reservations into individual lots. Now, any Native American who accepted that plot of land was allowed to become an American citizen. Now, those Native Americans who refused lost their land allotment. Then the government sold that land to non-Native Americans. Now, the last major, massacre occurred at Wounded Knee in South Dakota. The Library of Congress website states, on December 29, 1890, government officials banned a growing religion known as the Ghost Dance on a South Dakota reservation that month. Now, as part of the crackdown against the Ghost Dance, soldiers from the 7th U.S. Cavalry Regiment, that's Custer's again, but he's dead by now, arrested a band of Lakota who were traveling towards the Pine Ridge Reservation and confined them to a camp near Wounded Knee. The day after the arrest, the military attempted to recover weapons from the imprisoned refugees. A gun was discharged and the soldiers opened fire. When the shooting stopped, hundreds of Lakota men, women, and children were dead. Now, the Indian Wars of the West would last officially until 1924, when the federal government declared the Apache Wars to be over. However, earlier in 1890, the superintendent of the U.S. Census, Robert Percival Porter, announced the official closure of the frontier. Well, what is that? Well, basically he stated, in just a quarter of a century, the far western frontier had been settled, a frontier line, a point beyond which population density was less than 2 persons per square mile, no longer existed. So within the next 10 years, from 1890 until 1900, the United States would begin to project its power worldwide. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. If you did, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell for notifications of my next upload. But more importantly, share this video with your friends. Thank you for watching.